بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم رب شهر رمضان الذي أنزلت فيه القرآن وافترضت على عبادك فيه الصيام، صل على محمد وآل محمد وارزقني حج بيتك الحرام في عامي هذا وفي كل عام، واغفر لي تلك الذنوب العظام فإنه لا يغفرها غيرك يا رحمن يا علام. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. اللهم إني أفتتح الثناء بحمدك، وأنت مسدد للصواب بمنك، وأيقنت أنك أنت أرحم الراحمين في موضع العفو والرحمة، وأشد المعاقبين في موضع النكال والنقمة، وأعظم المتجبرين في موضع الكبرياء والعظمة. اللهم أذنت لي في دعائك ومسألتك، فاسمع يا سميع مدحتي، وأجب يا رحيم دعوتي، وأقل يا غفور عثرتي. فكم يا إلهي من كربة قد فرجتها، وهموم قد كشفتها، وعثرة قد أقلتها، ورحمة قد نشرتها، وحلقة بلاء قد فككتها. الحمد لله الذي لم يتخذ صاحبة ولا ولدا، ولم يكن له شريك في الملك، ولم يكن له ولي من الذل، وكبره تكبيرا. الحمد لله بجميع محامده كلها، على جميع نعمه كلها. الحمد لله الذي لا مضاد له في ملكه، ولا منازع له في أمره. الحمد لله الذي لا شريك له في خلقه، ولا شبيه له في عظمته. الحمد لله الفاشي في الخلق أمره وحمده، الظاهر بالكرم مجده، الباسط بالجود يده، الذي لا تنقص خزائنه، ولا تزيده كثرة العطاء إلا جودا وكرما. إنه هو العزيز الوهاب. اللهم إني أسألك قليلا من كثير، مع حاجة بي إليه عظيمة، وغناك عنه قديم، وهو عندي كثير، وهو عليك سهل يسير. اللهم إن عفوك عن ذنبي، وتجاوزك عن خطيئتي، وصفحك عن ظلمي، وسترك على قبيح عملي، وحلمك عن كثير جرمي، عندما كان من خطئي وعمدي أطمعني في أن أسألك ما لا أستوجبه منك، الذي رزقتني من رحمتك وأريتني من قدرتك وعرفتني من إجابتك، فصرت أدعوك آمنا وأسألك مستأنسا، لا خائفا ولا وجلا، مدلا عليك فيما قصدت فيه إليك. فإن أبطأ عني عتبت بجهلي عليك، ولعل الذي أبطأ عني هو خير لي لعلمك بعاقبة الأمور. فلم أر مولا كريما أصبر على عبد لئيم منك عليه. يا ربي إنك تدعوني فأولي عنك، وتتحبب إلي فأتبغض إليك، وتتودد إلي فلا أقبل منك، كأن لي التطول عليك، فلم يمنعك ذلك من الرحمة لي والإحسان إلي والتفضل علي بجودك وكرمك. فارحم عبدك الجاهل وجد عليه بفضل إحسانك، إنك جواد كريم. الحمد لله مالك الملك مجري الفلك مسخر الرياح فالق الإصباح، ديان الدين رب العالمين. الحمد لله على حلمه بعد علمه، والحمد لله على عفوه بعد قدرته، والحمد لله على طول أناته في غضبه، وهو قادر على ما يريد. الحمد لله خالق الخلق باسط الرزق فالق الإصباح، ذي الجلال والإكرام والفضل والإنعام، الذي بعد فلا يرى وقرب فشهد النجوى، تبارك وتعالى. الحمد لله الذي ليس له منازع يعادله، ولا شبيه يشاكله، ولا ظهير يعاضده. قهر بعزته الأعزاء، وتواضع لعظمته العظماء، فبلغ بقدرته ما يشاء. الحمد لله الذي يجيبني حين أناديه، ويستر علي كل عورة وأنا أعصيه، ويعظم النعمة علي فلا أجازيه. فكم من موهبة هنيئة قد أعطاني، وعظيمة مخوفة قد كفاني، وبهجة مؤنقة قد أراني، فأثني عليه حامدا وأذكره مسبحا. الحمد لله الذي لا يهتك حجابه، ولا يغلق بابه، ولا يرد سائله، ولا يخيب آمنه. الحمد لله الذي يؤمن الخائفين وينجي الصالحين ويرفع المستضعفين ويضع المستكبرين ويهلك ملوكا ويستخلف آخرين. والحمد لله قاسم الجبارين مبير الظالمين مدرك الهاربين نكال الظالمين صريخ المستصرخين موضع حاجات الطالبين معتمد المؤمنين. الحمد لله الذي من خشيته ترعد السماء وسكانها وترجف الأرض وعمارها وتموج البحار ومن يسبح في غمراتها. الحمد لله الذي هدانا لهذا وما كنا لنهتدي لولا أن هدانا الله. الحمد لله الذي يخلق ولم يخلق ويرزق ولا يرزق ويطعم ولا يطعم ويميت الأحياء ويحيي الموتى وهو حي لا يموت بيده الخير وهو على كل شيء قدير. اللهم صل على محمد عبدك ورسولك وأمينك وصفيك وحبيبك وخيرتك من خلقك وحافظ سرك ومبلغ رسالاتك أفضل وأحسن وأجمل وأكمل وأزكى وأنمى وأطيب وأطهر وأسنى وأكثر ما صليت وباركت وترحمت وتحننت وسلمت على أحد من عبادك وأنبيائك ورسلك وصفوتك وأهل الكرامة عليك من خلقك. اللهم وصل على علي أمير المؤمنين ووصي رسول رب العالمين عبدك ووليك وأخي رسولك وحجتك على خلقك وآيتك الكبرى والنبأ العظيم. وصل على الصديقة الطاهرة فاطمة سيدة نساء العالمين. وصل على سبطي الرحمة وإمامي الهدى الحسن والحسين سيدي شباب أهل الجنة. وصل على أئمة المسلمين علي بن الحسين ومحمد بن علي وجعفر بن محمد وموسى بن جعفر وعلي بن موسى ومحمد بن علي وعلي بن محمد والحسن بن علي والخلف الهادي المهدي حججك على عبادك وأمنائك في بلادك صلاة كثيرة دائمة. اللهم وصل على ولي أمرك القائم المؤمل والعدل المنتظر وحفه بملائكتك المقربين وأيده بروح القدس يا رب العالمين. اللهم اجعله الداعي إلى كتابك والقائم بدينك، استخلفه في الأرض كما استخلفت الذين من قبله، مكن له دينه الذي ارتضيته له، أبدله من بعد خوفه أمنا، يعبدك لا يشرك بك شيئا. اللهم أعزه وأعزز به، وانصره وانتصر به، وانصره نصرا عزيزا، وافتح له فتحا يسيرا، واجعل له من لدنك سلطانا نصيرا. اللهم أظهر به دينك وسنة نبيك، حتى لا يستخفى بشيء من الحق مخافة أحد من الخلق. اللهم إنا نرغب إليك في دولة كريمة تعز بها الإسلام وأهله، وتذل بها النفاق وأهله، وتجعلنا فيها من الدعاة إلى طاعتك والقادة إلى سبيلك، وترزقنا بها كرامة الدنيا والآخرة. اللهم ما عرفتنا من الحق فحملنا، وما قصرنا عنه فبلغنا. اللهم المن به شعثنا، واشعل به صدعنا، وارتق به فتقنا، وكثر به قلتنا، وأعزز به ذلتنا، وأغن به عائلنا، واقض به عن مغرمنا، واجبر به فقرنا، وسد به خلتنا، ويسر به عسرنا، وبيض به وجوهنا، وفك به أسرنا، وأنجح به طلبتنا، وأنجز به مواعيدنا، واستجب به دعوتنا، وأعطنا به سؤلنا، وبلغنا به من الدنيا والآخرة آمالنا، وأعطنا به فوق رغبتنا يا خير المسؤولين وأوسع المعطين. اشف به صدورنا، وأذهب به غيظ قلوبنا، واهدنا به لما اختلف فيه من الحق بإذنك، إنك تهدي من تشاء إلى صراط مستقيم. وانصرنا به على عدوك وعدونا إله الحق. آمين. اللهم إنا نشكو إليك فقد نبينا صلواتك عليه وآله، وغيبة ولينا، وكثرة عدونا، وقلة عددنا، وشدة الفتن بنا، وتظاهر الزمان علينا. فصل على محمد وآل محمد، وأعنا على ذلك بفتح منك تعجله، وبضر تكشفه، ونصر تعزه وسلطان حق تظهره ورحمة منك تجللناها وعافية منك تلبسناها برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين.
أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد وعلى أهل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين المعصومين رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي أما بعد فقد قال الله سبحانه وتعالى في كتابه الكريم وأقيموا الصلاة وآتوا الزكاة واركعوا مع الراكعين صدق الله العلي العظيم صلوات على محمد وآل محمد. This Ramadan, the first 2 weeks that I'll be speaking with you, I've chosen as a topic of spirituality through fiqh. And what we've been doing is we've been going through different ahadith of the Ahlul Bayt where they speak about the prayer. And the goal is to learn, maybe either brush up or maybe learn anew some of the rules of prayer, not in a comprehensive way because it's not possible in the time frame, but more importantly in a way that's grounded and rooted in the particular way in which the Ahlul Bayt speak. Right? So the way they speak and the way they speak to us, it's much more motivational and inspirational than the way we ourselves can speak. And so the fatwa of our mujtahid is the best understanding that we have of what the ma'soom wants from us. And that's invaluable. We have to have that. However, if we can also kind of peek behind the scenes and see what was the basis of that fatwa, then the hadith itself gives us some additional inspiration, kind of helps us to think of what the Imam himself is focusing on as he's telling us what to do and what not to do. The tradition I left you with yesterday, we spoke about half of the tradition, or more than half of the tradition. It was telling us about different things we should and should not do during the prayer. So there are different actions. So don't yawn during the prayer, don't stretch during the prayer, don't crack your knuckles during the prayer. All these different things that are detractions from the level of concentration that you have in the prayer. Like fidgeting with your hands and with your beard, and nowadays with your iPhones, and going in your pocket and doing different things that are extraneous actions. These should be minimized. Now, from a fiqhi perspective, you can do extraneous actions and you can still maintain the prayer. The standard from a fiqhi perspective is that you mustn't do anything that takes you out of the form of prayer. If you're moving around so much and you're so casual with your movements during your prayer that someone looks at you and says, I don't know what he's doing. It looks like he's just standing there, or he's talking on his phone, or it doesn't look like you're praying, then you're not praying. Your prayer is broken. Right? You should maintain the body position, the calmness, all the different things that are involved in the prayer to an extent, at very least, that it looks like you're praying. And if you break that, then your prayer is broken. So that's the legal red line. But what the Imam was telling us is something much better than that, much higher than that, a higher bar that actually don't even fidget, don't move, don't do all these extraneous actions because they distract you yourselves, they distract other people in the jama'ah, and they're distractions from the prayer. In the end of this tradition, this is Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam speaking. Recite a salawat together, please. Recite a salawat all together. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. In the end of this tradition, he mentions some more attitudinal things that we should avoid. So not just actions, but even the type of attitude that we have should be, we should avoid certain things. He says, وَلَا تَقُمْ إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ مُتَكَاسِلًا وَلَا مُتَنَاعِسًا وَلَا مُتَثَاقِلًا. Don't approach the prayer, don't stand for the prayer lazily. Kasl is with laziness. Mutana'isan, drowsily. When you're still drowsy, you still feel like you want to take a nap, or you're just woken up from a nap, or woken up from sleep for Fajr. Don't pray in that drowsy state. And mutathaqilan, don't pray kind of with a heaviness to you. You're like, oh, I have to pray again. And you're kind of like, okay, let me get it over with. And you're kind of heavy, and you're just doing it because you have to. Like someone's told you they're going to scold you. Don't have that attitude, right? So the laziness, it's something we should check ourselves. It's tempting, right? You're tired, or you're involved with something else that's more enjoyable, and then prayer time comes in, right? The tendency is to feel lazy about leaving this thing, or lazy about leaving a relaxed state to then go and have to go and pray. So that's something that we have to be conscious of and avoid. The Imam roots this in, he gives us kind of an extra motivation. He says, فَإِنَّهَا مِنْ خِلَالِ النِّفَاقِ. Avoid these attitudes, these ways of approaching the prayer, because these are characteristics of munafiqeen. Right? So that should be a wake-up call for us. Right? Not that if I'm lazy about the prayer one time, I'm a munafiq. That's not what he's saying, but it's like a slippery slope. If I start becoming lazy about the prayer, and I have the attitude that, I have to pray again, it's time again, and we have a negative attitude towards the prayer, instead of waiting for prayer, instead of eagerly, getting ready for prayer, and jumping for the opportunity to pray, and those kinds of things, like be excited about going to the masjid to pray in jama'ah. Instead of having that attitude, if I'm heavy and I'm always pulling back, then I should be careful, because I'm starting to assimilate some of the qualities that a munafiq has. A hypocrite has. A hypocrite, munafiq, someone who's kind of two-faced. On the inside, they have no faith. On the outside, they pretend to have faith. Right? So we don't want to start developing qualities that bring us closer to that inward kufr, inward rejection of faith. That's something we want to avoid. فَإِنَّ اللَّهَ سُبْحَانَهُ نَهَى الْمُؤْمِنِينَ أَن يَقُومُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ وَهُمْ سُكَارَى يعني سكر النوم. And he quotes this verse in the Quran where Allah says, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا, speaking to the believers, يَا أَيُّهَا الَّذِينَ آمَنُوا لَا تَقْرَبُوا الصَّلَاةَ وَأَنْتُمْ سُكَارَى حَتَّى تَعْلَمُوا مَا تَقُولُونَ. Right, so if you read the verse on face value, it says, "O you who believe, don't approach the prayer when you are drunk, intoxicated, until you know what you say." There seems to be some contradiction in that verse. So he's talking to believers, Muslims, right? And he's saying, don't come to prayer when you're drunk. Right? It seems to imply that, leave your drinking for other times, and then make sure you're sober by the time you come to prayer, right? There is this idea among some of the commentators that or drinking and becoming intoxicated through drinking was gradually rooted out of Islam. At first, there was just a kind of a description of the fact that there's harm in alcohol. There's benefit, there's harm, but you should avoid it because the harm is greater than the benefit, for instance. Right? Or this is something that is shaitan's, this is how he messes with you and causes trouble for you through intoxication, through drink. So you should avoid it. Right? And then the second stage, these commentators will say, is this, that at least during prayer time, don't be drunk. Right? And then a further verse says, no, absolutely, it's haram, it's to be avoided, and no longer is it allowed. So gradually, it was rooted out. Allama Tabatabai, one of our preeminent scholars and mufassirin, he calls the question and says that this doesn't make sense for several reasons. I won't mention all the reasons, but one of the basic reasons is something that's based on a very important principle that we should be aware of. And that is that Islamic law, the law of Allah, is not based on whim on arbitrary decisions that he's made. He hasn't just randomly said, let me just make pork haram randomly. Nothing wrong with it, let me just make it haram just to test him. Let me just, let me stop the men from wearing gold. Just randomly, let's just stop them from wearing gold. It's perfectly fine, but I'll just draw the line arbitrarily here. That's not how he makes laws. That's not the way Allah's law works. Allah's law works. His law is based on real benefit and harm. As our creator, as our sustainer, he knows what is good for us and what is bad for us. Not only on a physical level, but on a spiritual level as well. In fact, throughout our existence, he knows best what's going to lead us in a good direction, what's going to take us away. And with that knowledge of our fitrah, of how he's created us and what the benefit and harm is in the world, he has created guidelines for us. And he said that this is haram. Why? Because there's harm in it. Now, he doesn't always tell us the harm. He doesn't always spell it out that this is the harm that you're going to get into, so that's why you should avoid it. Sometimes he does. Right? In the case of wine, for instance, and intoxicants, he tells us that every muskir is haram. Everything that intoxicates you, messes with your mind so that you can't think, it slows you down in that sort of a way, then that's haram. So that gives us a general principle. He tells us that it's because of the intoxicating effect of wine and these different kinds of things. That's why it's haram. He doesn't always tell us. Pork, for instance, he hasn't told us why. Or we don't know from the Sharia why it's haram to eat pork. Right? So now, does that mean that there is no reason and it's arbitrary? No. So that's what I want to get at. The principle is that what we know for a fact is that every one of Allah's rules that he's given us is based on real benefit and real harm in those actions. It could be physical, it could be spiritual, it could be societal. It may not just be harm to me. Maybe I can avoid the harm. But on a societal level, generally speaking, because the harm will eventually get to a certain point, he's decided, no, this is haram. Even, like some people will say that, wine is beneficial. I won't get drunk, but maybe I'll just have a little bit just to get the benefit from it. No, he says that's a slippery slope. I don't want you to do that. So even if something's intoxicating in quantity, even a minute drop of that is haram for you. Right, so he's made that call because he knows our nature. He's the one who's created us. He knows what we're capable of in the positive and the negative sense. Right? And so Allah Ta'ala speaking about this prohibition of alcohol, it doesn't make sense to say that wine was, for instance, halal first, and then later it became haram. It was always haram. It was always prohibited. It was always evil because the harm is something real. The harm didn't all of a sudden start at some point. That, okay, from today it's going to cause you harm. It was always causing harm. Right? So it was always prohibited, always harmful for the human being. And we have the second reason why he says that the verse doesn't, it doesn't make sense that it's saying don't be drunk when you're praying. Drunkenness being kind of a literal sense of being drunken through substances, is that he's talking to the believers. Right? He's not saying, Ya ayyuhan nas, for instance, people, avoid drunkenness. Believers, right? And so the fact that he's saying don't approach prayer when you're drunk doesn't fit with the fact that he's talking to believers. Third, we have all these ahadith. This is one of the ahadith. We have many other ahadith from the Ahlul Bayt where they say when Allah is talking about sukr meaning inebriation, right? What he means is not inebriation through drunkenness. What he means is the inebriation that comes from sleep and drowsiness, right? So don't approach your prayer like you're a drunk, right? So imagine yourself. I don't know. Maybe you've had this experience waking up for Fajr, and you can't see anything, you can't even open your eyes, and you kind of hobble over to your sajada and pray, right? That looks like you look like a drunkard when you're walking like that, God forbid, right? So that's what he's saying don't do. Don't come to prayer when you're in that state. Like, wake yourself up. Either rest properly and then say your prayer, or plan ahead and make it so that you can pray in a way that you're awake, or do some activities like I mentioned yesterday, wash yourself or exercise or whatever it takes to get yourself ready for the prayer so that you're awake when you're praying. So don't approach the prayer when you're drowsy, when you're lazy, when you're kind of dragging your feet. That's not the way to approach the prayer. وَقَالَ لِلْمُنَافِقِينَ وَإِذَا قَامُوا إِلَى الصَّلَاةِ قَامُوا كُسَالَى. In Surah At-Tawbah, when he describes the munafiqeen, one of the attributes that he says is kind of a litmus test, an indicator that this person is a munafiq, is that when this person stands for prayer, he stands lazily. Right? That same kasl, that laziness is there. So don't be lazy when you're coming for prayer, because this is one of the traits of the munafiqeen. All right, so that's this hadith from Imam Muhammad al-Baqir alayhi salam. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad. So with that, we've been through a few hadith, I think 3 or 4 hadith, speaking in general terms about the prayer, and they've contained different aspects of some of the positions and the attitudes, the humility, things that we should have, and then some of the things that detract from prayer and the attitudes that we shouldn't have when we're approaching the prayer. With that, let's transition to speaking about a more specific aspect of the prayer. We have these different wajibat of the prayer. Right? A textbook kind of layout of the structure of the prayer, right, tells us that there are these 11 things that are wajib in the prayer. Right? And out of those 11 things, you have 5 arkan, 5 rukns, cornerstones of the prayer, without which the prayer can't stand. And the difference between the wajibat and the arkan, I'm sure the Sunday school students will have this fresh in their mind, hopefully. The wajibat are, of course, they're wajib, they're obligatory. You have to do them in the prayer. You can't purposefully omit the tashahhud, for instance, from your prayer. No. If you accidentally omit it, if you forget it, that's fine, that can be fixed. The arkan are wajibat that are, in addition to being wajib, also so essential to the prayer that without that essential element, the prayer can't stand. Like the cornerstone of a building, you pull the fountain, if you have 4 corners, you pull out one cornerstone of that foundation, the building can't stand anymore. So our prayer is built on 5 foundations, right? 5 arkan. The first of those arkan is the intention. So the nature of these arkan is even if you forgetfully mess them up, the prayer is gone. Right? You can't say, oh, I accidentally pulled the foundation out from this 4-sided, 4-cornered building. So because it was an accident, it should stay upright. Right? Naturally, it's going to fall if the supports are not in place. So the prayer is the same way. Right? Even if it's accidental, forgetful, whatever, even if you didn't learn it properly, and because of that you messed it up, once you learn it, once you figure it out, you need to go back and you have to make up those prayers again. Right? So there are 5 things that are rukn like that, that you must be extra careful with. Those 5 things are the niyyah, the intention behind the prayer. That's what we'll speak about today, inshallah. And then the qiyam, the fact that you're standing as you start the takbir al-ihram. And then third is the actual takbir that starts the prayer. Without those 3 things, you can't have the prayer. And then the ruku' and the sujood. So those are the 5 arkan, and then there are 4 other things, 6 other things that make up the 11 wajibat. All right, so the niyyah, the intention that we have, so this is a good general discussion because I think people have questions about this, and also niyyah plays an important role, actually a crucial role in all of our acts of worship. All of what are known as the ta'abbudiyat, those actions that we are commanded to do, there are actions where it's such an integral part of it that we have an intention that without that intention, the action doesn't take place. Our fast is one of them. Right? Some days you hear people say that, for instance, I haven't eaten all day. I haven't had anything to eat or drink all day from before sunrise. I've been on the go and working and this and that. I was too busy, and then it was sunset and I haven't eaten or drunk all day. Now, has that person fasted? Not an Islamic fast. Right? Just because you happen to not eat and drink because of circumstances doesn't constitute an Islamic fast, a religious fast. Yes, it's a fast from the perspective of abstaining from food and drink, a medical fast, for instance, but it's not an Islamic fast. To have an Islamic fast, you have to actually make the intention during the day. Right? While you're fasting, depending on the nature of the fast, if it's a Ramadan fast, then before Fajr, the intention has to be in place. If it's a qada fast, then by Dhuhr, you have to have the intention. If it's a mustahab fast, then by Maghrib at least just before Maghrib, before you break the fast, you should have the intention that since I haven't eaten all day, I haven't drunk all day, I might as well fast. Even that's good enough. But the intention must be there. All right, so intention is something that's very crucial, and the reason why it's crucial is because that's the heart of the act. Right? That is actually, the action itself is more like a shell. It's the facade. What's really important is the kernel of the act, which is the intention. Why am I doing that? Right? What's the purpose? Am I doing it for Allah, which is the right intention, or am I doing it for some other peripheral benefit? Right? So fasting, for instance, has health benefits. I'll probably lose some weight during the month of Ramadan. So if that's my primary goal in fasting, or well, my only goal definitely, then the prayer is gone. If I'm doing it for health benefits, I have no consideration that it's Allah's command. And if it weren't for the health benefits, I wouldn't even do it. Then that's not a fast for Allah. It's a fast for dieting. Right? So intention is really the heart. The statement that the Prophet has, a famous hadith, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Right? Actions are, in reality, valued according to the niyyah that underpins them. The intention that underpins them. Right? وَلِكُلِّ امْرِئٍ مَّا نَوَى. Every person gets what he intends. Right? So if I'm acting for a dunyawi purpose, then at most dunya is all I get. If I'm acting for ukhrawi purposes, for the hereafter, for Allah's pleasure, then I'll definitely get His pleasure. He'll also throw in as a added bonus dunyawi benefits as well. He takes care of the dunya because my intentions were noble and were ukhrawi. Doing acts for anyone other than Allah, or any purpose other than Allah, is a form of shirk. Right? Sometimes I think we become a little bit numb towards shirk because we feel like it's something so far out, so out there that it's completely irrelevant to us. And the Quran is constantly talking about shirk, constantly negating it, constantly denouncing it, and calling us tawheed. We shouldn't think that that's only tawheed as opposed to idol worship. Right? Idol worship is a very obvious form of shirk, but it's not the only form of shirk. Right? So even, you can think about, we talk about even very subtle forms of shirk that can creep into our hearts as believers. Right? Allah says in Surah Yusuf, وَلَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ إِلَّا وَهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. And most people, when they believe in God, most of them are mushrik. Believers. وَمَا يُؤْمِنُ أَكْثَرُهُمْ بِاللَّهِ. Most of them don't believe in God, but that they are mushrik. They're associating partners with Allah at some level. Right? So we talk about, there's some levels of shirk that are so egregious that it takes you out of the fold of believing in the oneness of God, out of the fold of Islam. Right? If you're to worship idols, for instance, that would be the most obvious form of shirk. Right? If you believe that there are multiple gods, that's an obvious form of shirk. But there are more subtle forms. So even, for instance, if you fear other than God, right? If you're scared of something other than God, that's a form of shirk. What else should we be afraid of besides God? He's the only one who has any power over us. Anyone else only has power over us to the extent that Allah gives him power. I'm under Allah's protection always. If harm comes to me, it's in my best interest. Because Allah is my protector. He's the gatekeeper, and He titrates difficulty and allows that difficulty to come to me to the extent that I have the capacity to endure it, and to the extent that it's to my benefit. So nothing can harm me. Nothing should scare me. But if I have weak faith, then I might be afraid of something other than Allah. And I won't have that strong faith that nothing can hurt me unless Allah wants him to hurt me, or wants that thing to hurt me. Right? So does that make me a mushrik? Does that make me a kafir, or take me outside of Islam? No. It's not that kind of egregious form of shirk, but it's a weakness in my faith. It's something that I need to address and work on to understand Allah's greatness, Allah's power, Allah's hold over me better, and show that I have that confidence in Him as the all-powerful by being calm in the face of danger and realizing that there's nothing, that thing can't hurt me. All I should be scared of is, am I going to be able to do my duty before God? Am I going to be strong enough to have the courage and have the trust that God's going to help me? That should be my fear. That's fear of God. That's not fear of that person. Right? With Musa alayhi salam, for instance, right? Imam Ali alayhi salam talks about the khawf. فَأَوْجَسَ فِي نَفْسِهِ خِيفَةً مُوسَى. In Surah Taha, Allah tells us that Musa, when the magicians threw down their ropes and their whatnot and created this trick that looked like all these serpents moving around, Musa felt fear in his heart. Right? Some people misinterpret that and say, oh, see, Musa he was a coward. He felt scared that he's going to lose the competition, or scared of what they're going to do to him. Imam Ali says, no, absolutely not. His fear was not for his personal safety or those kinds of things. His fear was that, what are people going to think? The people, these simple-minded people, they're going to be so impressed by this trick of theirs, they're not going to be able to see my miracle from Allah for what it is. Yeah. So that wasn't fear of people, a dunyawi fear. That was fear of Allah, and fear of whether or not he can fulfill the mandate that God has given him sufficiently. All right. So shirk, doing anything with the intention of other than Allah is a kind of shirk. Right? And it can be actually egregious depending on what the other motivations are. So the worst of these, one of the worst of these is riya. Right? Doing things to show off ostentatiously because I want to show somebody and garner praise from that person. Or I want them to hear about what a great person I am, what a great deed I did, what a great thing I said, and I want them to hear it. That's called sum'ah. So riya comes from ra'a yara, which means to see. Sum'ah comes from sam', which means to hear. Both are kinds of ostentation where I'm showing off. I'm doing something because I want to garner praise from people. One hadith from Imam as-Sadiq alayhi salam is the following. Recite salawat. He says, Kullu riya'in shirk. Every ostentation, every act of showing off is a kind of shirk. من عمل للناس كان ثوابه على الناس ومن عمل لله كان ثوابه على الله. If a person acts for people, then his reward is with people. And if a person acts for Allah, then his reward is on Allah. Allah will give the reward. Another hadith, maybe I'll close with this one and we'll continue the discussion tomorrow, inshallah. This is a hadith Qudsi. Hadith Qudsi is a kind of hadith that's from the Ma'soom, but it's actually originally from Allah himself. Right? So a regular hadith is just the statement of a Ma'soom or a description of the actions of a Ma'soom or the silent approbation of a Ma'soom. But sometimes the chain goes all the way back to Allah himself, and Allah is speaking, but it's not Quran. Right? So it's a quote from Allah that's not in the Quran. That's a hadith Qudsi. So when sometimes the Imams will quote the Torah said the following, the Injil said the following, Isa said this, Isa said this, and he goes back to Allah himself. Right? So this is a hadith Qudsi where the Imam is going back and quoting Allah himself. Allah says, Ana khayru sharik. I'm the best business partner. Sharik, right? When we think about sharik, la sharika la, we're talking about partners with Allah. Right? But in Arabic, a sharik is also a business partner, for instance. Right? So I put in half the money, you put in half the money, and we go into business together. We're sharik of each other. Right? So Allah says, I'm the best business partner. Why? He says, Man ashraka ma'ya ghayri fi amalin amilahu lam aqbalhu illa ma kana li khalisan. He says, if a person intends to do an act for someone alongside me, right? So if you do an act for God, but also to please the guy next to you and make him impressed with how good you are, how well you prayed. Right? So if your action is shared between Allah and a person, then Allah says, I'm the best business partner. Like, imagine if you're in business with someone, what would be the ideal? And you put in 50%, he puts in 50%. Naturally, you get 50% of the profit, and he gets 50% of the profit. Allah says, no. If you're going to do something for me and for someone, I give 100% of the profit to that other person. Nothing comes to me. And I'm not going to reward you for any of it. You understand that there's a kind of irony and there's humor in what he's saying to kind of give it a more of a punch. He's the best business partner. Why? Not in a positive sense, to our detriment. That if I think I can do something like 50% for Allah and 50% to impress the people around me, right? So I should get 50% reward in Jannah and 50% get the praise of people. Allah says, no, that's not how it works. If you do that 50%, 100% is the praise that you get from people. That's your full reward. What do you get from me? Nothing. Because I give all the attention that you gave to me, I give it to my partners, which are these people that you're trying to impress, and now you can go to them for your reward. Yeah, so that's the danger of riya. That's the danger of having a false intention or bad intention when we're doing things. And so with ibadah, especially when you get into jama'ah prayer, congregational prayer, one of the temptations, one of the ways that shaitan gets into our actions, he can't stop us from coming to the masjid. We're already intent on coming to the masjid, right? But what he can do is he can mess with the quality of our ibadah once we're there. And this is one of the ways he does it, right? So you pronounce things extra special. You say things with extra special, nice voice. Recite as-salawat ala Muhammad. Yeah, you do something to impress the people around you while you're in the masjid, right? That starts to interfere with the quality of your ibadah, right? So we'll talk more about the intention, inshallah, in the next couple of days. That should be enough for today. Salawat ala Muhammad wa ali.
Jazakallah Maulana. May Allah give us tawfiq to extract valuable lessons being taught here. For Maulana's sehat and salamti, please recite a very loud salawat. Brothers and sisters, tonight iftar is being sponsored by the families of brothers Jan Naqvi, Daman Shah, and Shaman Shah for their For their sehat and salamti, please recite a loud salawat. Let's recite a Surah Fatiha for the Isal Sawab of tonight's sponsors, Marhumeen, and all Marhum Mu'mineen and Mu'minat, especially for Marhum Sayyid Ali Raza Naqvi, Sayyid Imdad Hussain Shah, Sayyid Asghar Ali Shah, Sayyid Khurshid Haider Shah, Marhuma Sayyida Iftikhar Bano, Sayyida Hubbe Zahra Naqvi, Sarwar Begum, and Sayyida Ijaz Fatima. And again for all Marhum Mu'mineen and Mu'minat, preceded by a loud salawat. It's Maghrib time. For the recitation of Maghrib Azan, I would like to request our young brother, Brother Yahya Arastu, please come forward. For Muhammad Wali Muhammad Salawat.